you're no longer the chair.
I know, it's like when you're no longer the chair, you can come at the last second. Yeah.
We okay to start? Okay. Today's meeting of the Neighborhood Affordable Housing Advisory Board is called to order on May 9th. Welcome, everyone. Agendas of today's meeting are on the wall at the entrance to the chambers. Please remember to turn off your cell phones. To ensure a complete record of the board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. I will ask the board members to introduce themselves and identify the fields they represent. I'll start on my right.
Carmen Santiago, representing the people.
Camille Hepstein, representing employers.
Robin Field, residential lending.
Gabriela Camacho, residential affordable homes builder.
Lindsay Dacus Harrison, real estate.
And I'm Kevin Chenault, the chair, and I represent the nonprofit providers of affordable housing. Just want to mention today that one of our board members termed out last month, Pete Scalia, and he served representing the people and the people we serve, and he did that very well and brought up some great conversation points for us, and he will be missed on the board. Our first order of business is to approve the minutes of the board's April 11th meeting. May I have a motion to approve the item 2.1?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there anyone here here to speak on items not on today's agenda? If so, please step to the podium and state your name and spell your last name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak on a subject that is not on today's agenda.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Beth Davis, D-A-V-I-S, resident of 35 years of Clearwater and a volunteer working for housing. Thank you for all your work. None of this is easy, and I'm learning that more every week. It's very exciting to see the housing dashboard. Yay. Tracking the inventory we have, the resources available, and the construction plans in place are critically important. Some facts. The average median income in Pinellas is $62,000, $30 an hour. And 53% of the households in Clearwater earn more than the federal poverty level, but less than the basic cost of living, according to the Alice report of 2021. Our workforce for any economic development will continue to shrink as people move north and away to more affordable lifestyles. Making this all sustainable is more important as we plan the 2045 strategy. This work happens now. It was great to attend the Pinellas Housing Summit recently with some of you. It was unanimous from everyone there, including our mayor, that housing is the #1 priority. From London to Clearwater, they said. Oh, my timer's not on. If that's true, we need to put our money in the new budget for housing in Clearwater. The current Clearwater budget is just $710,000 out of the general fund for housing, out of a general fund total of $183 million. There was also an increase in revenue of $8 million from property tax revenue. So with $8 million plus this past year, actually the housing budget was planned flat, almost down 1%. At $700,000. Budget planning is going on now, and I invite you to join us at council meetings and speak to council and ask them to ask for more money for housing. We've suggested at the last council meeting that we ask for an additional grant writer so that we get our share of the federal money that's out there, and the state $700 million Sadowski fund that finally got funded, and also a housing coordinator. It's time for a housing coordinator. We had a sustainability coordinator at the very beginning. We need somebody to help all of the departments, all of the citizens trying to understand housing. Increase our investment and contribution for housing units, whether it is from our money or the grant block money that I don't understand yet. But if we have an opportunity to build housing, let's not delay it. If the money's over here, let's work to do it. There are only 6 council meetings now through Labor Day, and probably the budget will be finalized. And it would be nice to influence council earlier rather than later, so that the staff can have the best guidance, saying, yes, you do want us to ask for more money. And lastly, we're looking for low-hanging fruit. What money's budgeted now that we can act on today to help people get their homes rehabbed, rehab housing is funded with grants? How do we educate and ask for our website to be clearer on applications for that grant money? What can we do with Paint Your Heart Out? How can we make it bigger, larger, and brighter? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cassandra Gatson. That is spelled Cassandra. Last name Gatson, Gadson. I was here at the last meeting, and I would just like to, for one, say thank you. Some of the programs and resources that I was able to find out about the last meeting, I was able to get my wheelchair fixed. So helping out with mobility, that was done by Metropolitan Ministries. And I would just like to say that Metropolitan Ministries is a wonderful program. They have offered to help me to get the first, last, and security deposit for the place. However, the reason I'm here again is because that I don't think that they have enough funding. Hope Villages, the shelter that I'm currently staying in right now, they need more funding. They need more funding. They are, right now, cannot offer me, tomorrow is my exit date. I don't know where I'm going. They can't offer me any additional time because of housing due to the fact that they don't have enough money for housing. And they don't have enough money to house the women like me who still need housing. 45 days, I'm sorry, is simply not enough to undo the turmoil, begin the healing process, and to find affordable housing. I'm a disabled person. I'm on a fixed income. And on that fixed income, it barely covers the necessities for me and my children. It does not begin to cover what I need for housing. I'm looking for a part-time job, and my mobility will help with that. I'd also like to say thank you to Kathleen Beckham, who was so gracious. The way that I found out about this meeting and even knew that, even was brought to awareness that I could come and have a voice, was through her. At the Presbyterian Church, which she did a demonstration of some of the changes that she's trying to make. She showed me kindness that I hadn't been shown in quite a while. She invited me not only to be a part of the luncheon, but invited me to her table and served me herself. So I'm very appreciative of her for letting me know that I do have a voice. And so with that voice, I would just like to ask for more funding for these programs. They're doing great things, but there's just not enough time nor enough money. My children, I also like to speak on their behalf because they're just too little and don't have the words. My babies are suffering inside of the foster care system right now. My 7-year-old, which I spoke about her last week, had to have a spacer removed from her mouth. I would like to see cycles be broken from our family. I am, like I said in the last meeting, an ex-soap farmer, and even though I've told my child that's not the way to cope with things, she doesn't understand. She wants to come home. However, there is no home, and even with the help that's being offered, it's not enough. So anything that you guys can do, I greatly appreciate. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Beckman. I lead Sierra Club for the County of Pinellas. I wasn't thinking about coming up here and speak today, but just wanted to mention, last Thursday and Friday there was a resiliency conference, which the city of Clearwater had some attendees there. One of the panel discussions that they had was talking about insurance rates, which some of you that are related to either development or real estate are seeing that firsthand. It was a very scary kind of conversation that they had. Now, no real solutions that were necessarily discussed there, but something that I'm sure is going to affect people and is at some level going to start to push people out of homes to be able to afford to live in those homes anymore. So I don't know if that's come up in your discussions, or hopefully it will here soon, but it certainly was something when they were talking about overall resiliency. We're not resilient as a community unless we figure out how to address that situation and factor that in. So just thought I'd mention that.
It's a long walk. My name is Eliseo Santana, Santana. I gave you the card. I just want to basically introduce myself. I'm a longtime resident of Clearwater. I definitely am very interested in our issues and affordable housing issues in particular. I'm also the president of the League of United Latin American Citizens, known as LULAC. It's the largest Hispanic organization in the United States, and it is the oldest with over 130,000 members. I am currently the president of the largest council, which resides here in Pinellas County. And many of my members, in fact all of them, have voiced the need to address being able to live here. The affordability envelope has always been very tight, and as of recently, after COVID, it's just become an impossibility to be here. Many of the workforce that reside in Clearwater Beach, for example, that provide all the essentials of keeping our economy going through the tourism coming in, and they cannot afford to live here. Many of them are coming in from great distance to be able to get to work. And I'm not talking about from Clearwater Beach to Clearwater proper. I'm talking about Pasco and so forth. And for people that get just above minimum wage, that is a huge, that's a commitment. And if we continue not to provide a place consciously as a city, provide a place that they can afford that is safe to live in, we're going to start risking having a workforce to be able to keep what our economy going. So it's something of concern. Affordable housing is something that is so complex. There is no, I wish there was one, I wish I could tell you do A, B, C, and D. What I will say is that I want to be a partner with you and bring about more of the voice of the people. I am very thankful to Carmen Santiago, your board member, that invited me and others and got us involved in realizing that this board was here and the power that it has, and because of that information now we're focusing in on not necessarily giving you solutions because that is so complex, but in giving you the voice and maybe a direction. Do everything you can to be able to make it happen. Many of the people that I represent, in my household, have a multi-generational household. And many of the rental, I thank you for listening to me. And there again, Eliseo Santana.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else coming forward, we'll move on to the next item. Item 4.1, review the current and planned affordable housing inventories, citywide housing study, and 5-year dashboard. Ms. Sanderson?
Thank you so much, and good morning. So my apologies, because this should actually be sitting under old business, but because it's next in the agenda, I'll bring it forward now, because it's not a terribly lengthy agenda, as we know. So this is actually, I call this old business because this is actually something we've been talking about for some time. This was discussed during our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee session last fall, and as part of NAHAB, to bring forward the housing dashboard. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. That was, it's not yet live. I still have a little bit of work to do to get that up on the city's website, but it's part of a sort of a citywide strategy to implement a number of different dashboards. So this one was created just a couple of weeks ago. But before I get into that, I'd like to remind this board and the public, and I'm sure those hundreds of people watching this morning, that our mission is to produce and preserve affordable and workforce housing units. And we do that by engaging qualified homeowners and providing down payment and closing cost assistance, rehabilitation loans, including those addressing accessibility for disabled Americans, and developers of single-family and multifamily units through the acquisition and or construction of new units, and then multifamily property owners with rehabilitation loans and the like. So by and large, these properties become land use restricted. We file a document ensuring the long-term affordability, and that is how we preserve units over time. So even through sale of properties and so on and so forth, those units are protected and preserved for a period of time. It's called the affordability period. So just some common definitions that I'd like to center around, because these definitions can change, believe it or not, between Fed and state and between jurisdictions. So for our purposes today, I'd like to center around these as a common language. So area median income is established by HUD and SHIP, and it's based on household size, and sometimes those numbers can be different. As I mentioned, our household income limits are also established by HUD and SHIP and based on household size, and it is the evaluation of household income of all household members over the age of 18. Affordable, that's the term we use for 30 to 80% of area median income, with 30% being extremely low, 50% very low, 80% low. And again, it can change a little bit between feds and state. 60% comes into play on occasion there as well. Workforce housing is generally accepted as 80 to 120% of AMI. Some jurisdictions include that up to 140, and now 150 we're seeing on occasion. And then those land use restriction agreements that, as I mentioned, establishes the period of affordability. Our funding sources often dictate that. And if the city provides a density boost to accommodate construction of multifamily, that affordability of rental, that affordability period is extended to 30 years. If it's for home ownership and they receive a density boost, it's a 20-year affordability period. So that affordability period can vary. And also, that land use restriction agreement also establishes the income restrictions and the number of units that are restricted. And then the subsidy limits, those are, again, established by HUD and SHIP and based on household size. So support for these things is provided through rehabilitation. So this is on a per unit subsidy cap, currently a $45,000 loan. We're going to be changing that a little bit. Actually, quite a bit. We're going up to 60%. So that will be going forward to council in early June. And one of the primary reasons for that certainly is cost of materials, cost of trades. So we're seeing that we can't do the kinds of projects that we need to do with that low amount. We also receive some ARPA funding, or what we commonly refer to as ARPA funding, that provides for those 80 to 120% AMI, our ability to increase that loan as well. So on the lower than 80%, we'll grant fund some funding. New construction, we have loan and grant local government support for low-income housing tax credits. It's a federal tax credit administered by Florida Housing Finance Corporation. It requires local government support of varying amounts, and we'll often issue that as a loan rather than a grant. We like loans when we're able to have loans with developers because it produces what we call program income, or receivables, revenues, things like that we get to use over and over again. Our loans to developers are used for land acquisition or new construction. We can also do land donation. This was a charter requirement several years ago. We can now donate up to 5 acres of land for affordable housing when appropriate. And then, as I mentioned, a density boost. So our land development code allows for a certain number of units based on parcel size, et cetera, and how it's zoned. We can provide density boosts to encourage affordable and workforce housing. And these funding sources typically require a matching support, and we often turn to Pinellas County Housing Finance Authority and Pinellas County Housing and Community Development. Occasionally there's others as well. For homeowner occupied, this includes, for today's purposes, this is going to include townhome, duplex, triplex, quadplex, condo, that kind of stuff. So, most often, of course, we're talking about single family, but we can provide purchase assistance up to $45,000 loan and up to $15,000 grant that's going to remain for purchase. Rehabilitation, currently, I think I misspoke earlier. Currently, our rehab loan is $50,000, we're increasing that to $60,000. And new construction, we can provide loans to developers for that land acquisition, new construction and land donation. So this is not linked, so sorry. I'll come back to this when I put it up. I will show you the five-year dashboard demo. I'm gonna have to find it on my laptop, so stay tuned. We'll come back to that a little bit later under Director's Report, if you don't mind. Current inventory, so this gets really wonky. And I could provide you a million reasons why this data is hard to come by, even for us, and we live in the data. But because we subsidize only certain numbers of units within an entire, the way that our funding sources work, we only subsidize, for instance, up to 11 units when we're using home, even though it might be a 150-unit complex. So our data only reports 11, even though it's actually 150 units that are held as affordable. So it's a little bit wonky when we try to gather this information, report it out, because the public doesn't care what we subsidize, they care what's available, right? But for today's discussion, this does include subsidized or land use restricted properties, whether we hold the land use restriction or somebody else does. It includes rental for public housing, that's your Section 8 very typically, the housing choice and place-based vouchers. Homeowner occupied, which is limited to our current loan portfolio. And that's because once that loan or land use restriction is relieved, we no longer count it as affordable, even though it may still well be affordable. It does not include, because it's very difficult to quantify, what we call NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing. Those are often your mobile home parks, those below market homes, due to age, condition, size, or special needs. So I did include special needs here, which we often fund, as you know, because the question that was posed to me by Councilmember Teixeira back in March was how many available units for affordable and workforce housing. So for purposes of this data set, I did not include special needs. And I'm not advancing for whatever reason. There we go. So this one is, I'll try to explain. It made a lot of sense when I crafted it in this PowerPoint. Public housing, as you can see, 961 units. That includes your place-based and housing choice vouchers. And that's typically your 30% or extremely low income. So in actuality, it should probably be sitting at the bottom of that list if we're going in numeric order. That's shown there in the gold, and you can see the vouchers. That's really your housing choice vouchers, probably that 701. The balance of those shown in senior and family are your place-based vouchers that are, like Barbie Towers as an example here locally. The 120% AMI, we have very little of that, only 84 units currently in inventory, according to our land use restrictions, right? Those are all family units at this time. The majority of which you can see there are the 80% AMI at 599 units. We have 3 at the 60% AMI, and that's because the state has certain funding buckets that dictate the 60%. We don't see it very often, but it's here under our figures. 196 at the 50% AMI. So that's your very low income. Total on this slide is 1,843, and again, I don't know why I'm not advancing. And then, the question was asked to me, where are these? And I couldn't remove some of these symbols there, like hospital and shopping and things like that, but I did map them with some color codes there for family public housing and affordable, senior affordable, and senior public housing. This is going to be tricky. So homeowner occupied is crazy number. This is only 310, and we know we have far more than 310. It's because that's what our loan portfolio has, as I mentioned. It's hard for us to gauge this. But the housing study I'm going to describe in a couple of minutes is going to help get to the reality of some of these numbers, so we're excited about that. So anticipated inventory, and yes, that is true, delivery in 2 to 4 years. 288 multifamily units, 111 which are affordable, and 177 which are workforce. If you remember in that slide I showed, we actually don't have very much in workforce housing, so it's really needed. The yellow and gold there represent the workforce housing, the 100 and 120% AMI, the balance of which is the affordable units broken down by extremely low to to moderate income. And then the breakdown of homeowner occupied versus multifamily. So that's what's currently in our pipeline. I should say that's currently what I have a high degree of confidence will move forward. There's a lot more that's in the pipeline. They just haven't gotten to a place in which we've made a funding commitment or encumbered funds, things like that. So the first one, you've seen this one before, I believe. This is Clearwater Gardens at 1250 Cleveland Street. This is the whole of the old Economy Inn. In the far corner, it's shown on that screen. Behind that building is where the community garden sits. And when we issued the RFP, and actually the CRA issued the RFP a few years ago, when they issued that, they wanted to ensure that that community garden remained an amenity to the project. And so it absolutely is going to be an amenity to the project. It's going to be preserved and probably improved to some degree as it becomes more and more active. The project is a low-income housing tax credit project of 81 units. These are all affordable, ranging from 30 to 80% AMI. Clearwater Housing Authority is providing 20 project-based vouchers. That's for that 30%. And the developer on that is Archway. They have gone through Development Review Committee. They are headed to CDB, and that project we think will break ground probably in January. It is a year-plus long construction cycle. So that one is probably about 2 years out before we have occupancy. 306 South Washington Avenue. This is the developer on this is somebody you may recall. It's Peter Leach. He's done Woodlawn Trail. He's done Garden Trail. He did the Country Club Townhomes off of Betty and Drew. So he's been in this space for a very long time. This is a primarily workforce housing project, and he's doing this in partnership with Clearwater Housing Authority. And I think what is surprising for people to know is that Clearwater Housing Authority isn't just voucher-based housing. They do mixed income housing, as evidenced by this. So this is going to be, believe it or not, workforce housing is the hardest for us to subsidize, and that's because all of our funding sources are primarily geared to that 80% and below. SHIP is the only funding source we currently have that we control that funds workforce housing. And the way that, although it's changing, the way that property taxes are calculated, legislatively under 80% AMI, it's based on income, so rent rates. Over 80%, it's based on construction value. So the property taxes associated with still restricted properties changes dramatically once you hit that 80 to 120. And that makes it tough for it to pencil out. And as I said, we have very few funding sources. Penny for Pinellas 4 now is available from the county. This is actually a really difficult project to subsidize. But I think we're getting close to bringing the contracts forward. We're planning to bring them forward in August. That one will probably be a year before it goes under construction. And I think the first occupancy is slated for 2025. I think late 2025, but I don't have that data in front of me. Completion in 2026. Uh, 1454 South Martin Luther King Jr. Ave. So this is one that it's right near Norton Apartments, and near the intersection of Woodlawn and near Ross Norton. We sent this out to RFP. We own the land. It is originally acquired by CDBG, so it was required to be affordable. Or workforce. So we put it out to RFP. We had co-developer respondents that were awarded the project, those being Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services and Habitat for Humanity. It will be hopefully 24 townhomes. That's how it's currently laid out. Site plan development could alter that slightly, but right now we're planning on 24 units, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. These will all be built exactly the same. 12 of them will be reserved for under 80% AMI and 12 for that 80 to 120% AMI. Habitat will manage those under 80. Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services will manage, when I say manage, bring in the home buyers over 80% AMI. So that one, we've had some challenges in getting this one to the finish line, and that's because some of the subsidies we're providing are new for us. They're dealing with solar. There'll be solar installations on this that will be owned by the homeowner, as well as EV-capable wiring that will be provided. So we're going to fund those subsidies, those solar and EV-capable under our ARPA policy. So one is coming forward on June 5th for council approval on June 8th. And then kind of across the road from that is 1467 South MLK. This is 40 units. The developer is interested in doing affordable or workforce housing, and he has sought a density boost. So 10 of these units under that density boost will be land use restricted. And the developer is not terribly comfortable in the affordable housing space, never done a project in that space. And you know, one of the challenges for affordable housing is when it's a rental property, you're required to conduct monitoring every year. And because the density boost is being provided, that's 30 years of affordability that monitoring would be required. That can be intimidating for somebody this is not their daily business. So I am suspecting that it will come in as a homeownership project, condoed probably. And so we'll have homeownership. It is a 20-year affordability period, but so long as those 10 units are not sold during that time frame, the developer really has nothing to monitor, if you will, once acquired. So that's what I'm expecting, and Charlie Uslander from Little Eagle Associates is the developer on that. So I'm going to move to, and again, there's not a lot more that's in the application phase that I just didn't feel comfortable bringing forward as projects because they're not really to that stage yet where I can say we have a high degree of confidence. But we are conducting a citywide housing study, and this housing study is actually to serve both sides of the house and ED&H. So, you know, we know, as been said here today with citizens' comments, we know that there is a dearth of affordability, and the challenge is in identifying, as I've mentioned, really counting all of that inventory, understanding it, and then putting that up against our demographics, against our economic trends, against our economic objectives, right? So how do we plan for and support the types of housing mix that we need to serve our long-term economic objectives, for the types of jobs we desire to attract and retain, those kinds of things. So this housing study is going to touch on a number of these different things, leverage some of the studies that have been done countywide, like the Target Employment Industrial Land Study for Pinellas's Advantage Pinellas program, a number of different things. And it will culminate in probably late fall, probably November, with a facilitated workshop with our city council to really help dive into this, drive policy, get council, you know, a common understanding, much as we're trying to do today in our discussion, to really have as I said, a workshop to talk through how do you accommodate need versus, you know, community, right? Some of those challenges, maybe NIMBY issues and the like, right? How do we turn that into YIMBY? So some of those kinds of things will be discussed at that workshop. So as I said, I will come back to the dashboard. I will find it here in my my OneDrive, and we'll review that in just a minute. So happy to take any questions though on that stuff.
Questions from the board? Comments? Ms. Anderson, I just want to thank you for doing the work on this and bringing it forward to us. It is educational for us. Does anyone from, appreciate that. Does anyone from the public wish to comment on this item? Seeing no one, this is a presentation only. There is no action required. Oh.
No, I want to say that, for one, from my side, seeing this is amazing to be able to see, because you see the programs, you see things that you don't know how it all works, so being able to be educated on how it all works is, for one, it's something that's needed. And two, did a great job. I love PowerPoint.
Good, you're gonna get another one. You'll have more, need more stuff to be excited about this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is 4.2, approval staff recommendation funding allocations among applicants for fiscal year 2023-25 Community Development Block Grant funding. Ms. Sanderson.
Okay, Nicole, thank you. Thank you. So this is a really awful spreadsheet. And last night when I was trying to figure out how to present this to y'all, I decided to create a PowerPoint. So this one is not in your packet. This is really just for my benefit because it gets it's cumbersome, it's awkward, and it's difficult to see. So you're welcome. I'm gonna move on to a PowerPoint. I may go back to that spreadsheet on occasion though as we move through this. So this is a required public hearing.
We're figuring it out.
Do not look at the screen. Yeah, that's awful. This is a required public hearing and to discuss these numbers. And as I said, it gets a little bit wonky. What's required is that we talk about our CDBG funding allocation. So most of what I'm going to be talking about here is that first column related to CDBG. We can talk about all of the other stuff, but all that other stuff is actually going to be discussed more in depth in July when we review the annual action plan. So on the second page, we'll start with the last page. Why not start at the end? So the last page you see in the CDBG column, we have $2.1 million anticipated. So that's our prior year entitlement, that's our remaining program income or carryover, right? Those are carryover figures. Our estimated 23-24 program income, because when we do loans, those kinds of things, it comes back in as program income. And our 23-24 entitlement allocation, that 913,337 is the entitlement. Together, those equal 2.1 million. That is never actually the number because there's a lot of estimates in there. And we have projects currently in the works that could pull down funds that then don't carry over, right? So, but we have to produce a budget. And it may change a little bit when we get to July because we'll revise these. So I'm not expecting you to read this, but I'm pointing to where on that spreadsheet it is. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the entitlement information, 913,337. We have as you know, we have a 15% cap on public services. So that equates to $137,000. So we had a competitive application cycle close in March. We heard presentations in April. Technical review committee and staff did their scoring and ranking on that. And on that spreadsheet, that wonky spreadsheet, next to all of those projects, you'll see the average score that's in there. That's what those little numbers mean. And so they're shown in the public services category. They're shown in score order. We had 8 applications that are subject to the 15% cap. We had 8 applications on public facilities that are subject to a $90,000 cap that we imposed for our applicants. We had 2 that come in under our economic development and micro enterprise. It's a category that we can utilize that is not subject to the cap, the 15% cap, even though they might be providing a service. It's not considered a public service per HUD. And then we have homebuyer education and counseling. So this is, often provided by Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services and Suncoast Housing Connections, which in fact were the 2 applicants. So a total of 22 applicants were received by the deadline. As I mentioned, 8 application in the public services. So this is, the next phase of that awful spreadsheet. We use a tiered funding system, and we've been using this system for several years now. I don't know how long, probably 5 or 6 years. To help us figure out how to allocate and reward the highest scoring. This is why the scoring matters, quite frankly, because when we have to allocate funds for public services, we look to those best presented, most qualified, those organizations that we're highly confident in that can actually expend the funds by our deadline. And that's where that ranked score comes in to determine the tier. So how we broke down the tiers this year, we had 8 applications. We put 3 of them in the 50% tier, and what that means is that $68,500 is 50% of our $137,000 cap, and we split that between those 3 applications evenly at $22,833. We had 35% was our next tier. Those 3 applicants will receive $15,983, and then finally we had 2 in the bottom tier, and that's $10,275 per application. On the public facilities side, we have 1.149 and change, right? This includes some of those carryover funds because our total entitlement is only $900 and change. So When we get into public facilities, we're using entitlement as well as carryover and program income funds, things like that. So we had 80 applications, 90,000, as I mentioned, was the cap during the application cycle. However, it was communicated to projects prior to the application that while we're limiting it to $90,000 during the competitive round, once we award those, throughout the year, we can accept public facilities applications throughout the year. So that's why you'll see other TBD at 590, 552. That's for those that come in throughout the year or that may get increased as we go through a project with one of our contractors or one of our contract agencies. So that 90,000 cap, when you look at the spreadsheet, one of which actually applied at 95,000. So in this spreadsheet, you'll see that was reduced to 90,000. We then add $5,000 in here in the budget per project because we have out-of-pocket expenses like environmental review record. We have a contract inspection firms that does pre-bid and Dave's Bacon, some of those kinds of things. So those are project delivery costs, which are allowed expenses. And then, as you see, so $519,000 was eligible applications received, or the cap on those eligible applications, but with those fees, it came to $564,000. So next in that spreadsheet is our administrative set-aside. So HUD entitles us to set aside 20% for administrative expenses. That's $182,667. That's administrative on the entitlement. We use that for staff salaries, benefits, operating expenses, and the like. Our funding sources, all of our funding sources have administrative set-asides. It's very typical in the grants world. So in the economic development, the total allocation there, I didn't put a dollar figure, sorry about it. This was late last night. Hispanic Business Initiative Fund applied for $50,000. They serve Hispanic entrepreneurs and small businesses, and they've been doing this program for several years. We Care was an applicant, you may recall from the presentations. They applied for $180,000, and we're interested in supporting that organization to develop childcare businesses, right, as a part of microenterprise small business development. And I don't know that we will fund fully $180,000. Devil's in the details when we get to contract negotiation to make sure that it's appropriate spend. I think we had some concerns over some of their budget as they presented it. But we have put money in the pot with the hope to be able to fund that organization or others similar. Because it is not part of a CAP program like the public services, we can solicit additional applications throughout the year to support childcare development, childcare business development, which you probably all know we have a severe shortage, particularly in the infant to toddler range for childcare facilities and providers. Facade improvements, childcare operations, as I mentioned, acquisition and demolition of slum and blighted condition is also lumped into this category, so $155,000 plus in there. So that's what that budget category is about. When we get to homebuyer education and counseling, we decided to, again, have this funded by SHIP. It's not a lot of a dollar amount, but SHIP makes it easy for us to utilize those funds, easier certainly than our CDBG reporting requirements and the like. So Suncoast Housing Connections of Tampa Bay Neighborhood Housing Services, though they applied under our CDBG competitive round, we're actually going to fund them out of SHIP. And then other funding source allocations. This is all of the other stuff from all of those other columns. So there's home entitlement and program income, including carryover shown on that. There's our Community Housing Development Organization, or CHODO. We're required to work with a certified CHODO. This year's Clearwater Neighborhood Housing Services is our CHODO. And then we have revolving loan funds. This is what that program income comes into to support. It's rehab, new construction, acquisition, economic development activities like facade improvement, loan to grants, and the like. As I mentioned, review of all of that stuff is required in our July annual action plan discussion, where we'll have goal outcome indicators, and you'll see an even worse spreadsheet, but with lots of words on there. That one will be presented in July, and Amanda Warner will be here for that to present those. So I'm gonna stop here. We can go to the really awful spreadsheet if you have questions specific to that or any place here on this PowerPoint, but I'm happy to take questions, and I've got some staff here as well that I'm certain can pinch it for me if need be.
Denise, I have a question. How are the caps determined? Like the 90,000 cap for public facilities and infrastructure, the 15% cap for public services and so on. How are those caps determined?
So HUD establishes the cap for public services at 15%, and I have to say it is awful that they established that cap. Because as you know, we have so many really fantastic nonprofit organizations that could utilize a lot of money, and HUD puts a cap on it. And public facilities, we could do that all day long with the funding that we have as construction projects and the like, and we do. We established the $90,000 cap. So from a procurement perspective, it's easier for us if we're under 100,000. So we set it at 90,000 plus the 5,000 for delivery, project delivery costs. So that's why we established that. So from a procurement perspective, it's easier if we stay under 100,000. But once we get through this process, we wanted to make sure that we had enough money to support any applications that came forward in the competitive realm. But once we get through this process, we'll work with those public facility providers. And if they're seeking to do more, we have a total cap of $180,000 now in public facilities. So any one project can apply, after we get through this, can apply for up to $180,000.
Thank you.
So I guess my question is a follow-up to Gabby's question. Is the carryover money from last year or from previous year a result of those caps? Is that why we have so much money remaining when we know we have so much projects that would need it?
So that carryover number looks kind of nutty, but really what that is, by and large, those are already encumbered for public facility projects that aren't complete.
Okay.
So a lot of the public facility, we don't have to get into the weeds of how HUD makes our life really difficult, but they like to make our life really difficult. And some of those processes require environmental review, bid process, and the like. And they have to be conducted not necessarily simultaneously. In fact, most cases it's in a certain order of operations, which makes it an excruciatingly long process before we can issue a notice to proceed, which means you can go pull your permit and begin your project. Terribly long process. So we're changing a few things this year. We hope to complete, following today's meeting, at the end of this month, we will send all of our anticipated project, environmental review record it's called, over to our consultant Terracon to begin that, and we will give them till the end of August to complete all of our ERRs, which is a lengthy process to go through, because they have to notify various organizations, tribal communities, and the like as part of that process, and many of them have 30-day response timeframes. So it's baked in to be long and painful. So what that often means, though, is that these projects very often carry over into the following year, and that's largely what you're seeing on carryover is public facilities projects that are in progress.
And so are you saying that those are the amounts that maybe already be allocated, but they still show it as carryover? Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
I'm not saying that all of them are allocated.
Yeah.
And the other component too is, on many of our funding sources, while we love program income because it gives us a lot of money, when you look at that spreadsheet, so I'm going to torture you with it. When you look at that spreadsheet, what did I do with it? That's not it. Did I close it? Goodness. I will pull it up. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. You see what, $11 million, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
or we hope to have a lot of money. And so it's a little bit misleading to say, with all due respect to Ms. Davis, $700 and some odd thousand is what we spent. That clearly that's not our budget, right? So, bringing this back up.
Does your spreadsheet show the amount that they actually requested?
It does not.
Okay, because I kept, it's on my phone, but I
No,
didn't
sorry.
see what they requested compared to what we're
Yeah,
proposing.
I think I do have that information, and Irene certainly does. She's got her spreadsheets open.
Okay.
Is there any question? Yeah, so we're looking at anticipated funding, all funding sources included, at $11 million, right? We have some projects that will consume $3 million. Others less. It's a little bit nuts. We have to spend, in most cases, we have to spend our program income before we can touch entitlement. And when we have projects delayed, 306 South Washington's a great one, Archway is another one. We've already encumbered funds for those projects to ensure that we can move those projects forward. And so it's keeping us from touch bit until we actually have those contracts. It's keeping us from being able to tap into our entitlement until we can expend our program income. It's this delicate dance. We love loans, as I said, because we collect on them over time. But when we build up this pot, it keeps us from being able to spend our entitlement, which shows up in essence as carryover. So it's a really delicate dance, probably as much art as science. And team does a great job trying to figure all this out. Our senior accountant pulls her hair out all the time, trying to figure out where the money's coming and going, and then trying to predict it. And then one of my big, hairy, audacious goals for October 1 that I keep talking to the team about is we don't have a single system that projects program income over time. When are those loans due and receivable? We have a grant management system and a loan tracking system, and we need to merge all of those things so that we have real intelligence about where the money is coming and going, so that we can better plan how to manage our obligations and our opportunities with that.
Yeah, I guess it's just, we're talking about this, and it relates to what Lindsay was asking. When you look at how much these organizations are doing, how much they requested, and how sometimes little we're able to fund them, and it goes back to the conversation we just had with Cassandra that came up, is if all of that money is here, and that's why I was asking that question about the carryover, why aren't we giving it if we were able to? So
Legally restricted.
Right.
Is there any other way that they can, any other funding available?
Yeah, so we do have $250,000 in current general fund. I believe the proposal is to increase that by 20% to $300,000. We currently fund 6 organizations. With that, including a little bit to Homeless Leadership Alliance, all of them, serve homeless populations. And per resolution, we can only fund those organizations that comply with Homeless Management Information System, HUD compliance. So 6 organizations: Homeless Leadership Alliance, Pinellas Hope, Safe Harbor, HEP, Salvation Army, and a couple of others. So this year we're expanding that. I should mention Hope Villages of America also for their DV shelter received some funding. So in this next fiscal year, we're going to add, I believe, 2 more recipients to that list, including CASA and St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul, when we initially started the program, was not a participant in HMIS. They are now, and they're doing a lot of good stuff. So they'll be funded as well. So yes, some of these nonprofits that you heard from will receive additional, generally unrestricted funds. We put very few restrictions on them because operating capital is the most difficult to receive.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, Ms. Sanderson.
You're welcome, and I'll get working on finding that dashboard.
Okay.
for you.
As there's no old business items scheduled for today, we'll move on to the director's report, but yes, go ahead. We have a comment from the public.
Thank you, Brian Beckman again. Thank you, Denise, for that presentation. One of the things I'd ask all of you to consider from the last 2 agenda items that were presented is to always have in front of you what are the goals that you have, and to have those be as much numerically driven as possible. I know you've got some overarching visions or objectives. One of the, and again, I represent Sierra Club for the county, and so I'm very much focused on the city's environmental plan, which is called Green Print 2.0. And one of the great things about that document is it has many goals in it that are time-bound and numerically driven. And that would be something that with all the money that you review and you consider different projects, as well as the fantastic dashboard that Denise has put together and is putting in front of you, to always have that in the context of to what end? What are the goals that you have in the first place that are driving those expenditures to be put in those different places? I would contend that it's you can get lost without those goals if you don't have it in that context all the time. You know, when you've got that money, and I'm sure a number of you with the organizations that you represent, you have goals that are not just money goals, just for the sake of money, but to reach other goals of like how many homes are you trying to put out there and affect this many families, et cetera. So I'd ask that you consider that you have that in front of you at all times. If you don't know what those goals are, please try to work towards having that visibility. Thank you.
Thank you. And I made a mistake. I just realized that item 4.2 is for approval, so we'll talk about that in a minute. Come on forward.
Sorry, I'll be short, but Brian inspired me. When it comes to goals, I think what we heard is that there is a complex that'll be ready in '25, and another one in '26, and another one negotiating money, and then much on the table that we don't know about, which is probably '27, '28, '29. So when you think about goals, sometimes they're lofty, 100 a year, and sometimes, you know, at what number of average median income. And, but there is $11 million to spend. And you're right, the carryover. And I talked about my perception on staff, what FHE, you know, as a gatekeeper, but it sounds like we should be asking for an FHE for transparency on how the money can be spent by year. And, you know, how do we answer these questions with logic on, you know, the right people on your team? You know, there should never be any openings on your team. You know, if it's the priority, you should never have any openings. So some of that inspiration comes to me for what the goals should look like. Thank you.
Thank you.
As much help as you need.
I feel like if I was like one of them individuals dressed in a very special gown coming up and presenting myself, but Eliseo Santana, I listen. First of all, I want to say thank you to Denise for doing such a wonderful presentation. It's so much information. It takes a while to digest it and to. But one of the things that I have to say that struck my attention was that it was mentioned that in one of the projects that we're going to be addressing the ongoing expense of living in the property by the homeowners, and when it was mentioned that solar was going to be put in there, affordability is such an important thing, and as we move forth. So home ownership is one thing, but someone like myself, and there are many in my category that have fixed income, it is better to have a capital expenditure at the beginning that will be steady in the cost of maintaining the household than to have an ever-escalating cost of electricity. So I don't have any answers except that bravo for that consideration. I think that all of the projects that we move forth, when we're able to, that should be a consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Kind of all wanted to speak a little bit more. No, I also wanted to say that was a wonderful presentation. I just want to say thank you for, you know, the education, because, you know, knowledge is really power. I did like to be able to understand, as Ms. Hepting mentioned, where kind of when you see that big number of what is available and how it is. I understand that your guys' hands is very tied. I deal with the other side of the housing, which is trying to use those vouchers and try to utilize the resources that you guys do work so hard to be able to provide to us. So I just wanted to say that thank you for explaining, because it takes a little bit of the frustration away in that waiting process, and to be able to see, okay, our community, it's not that they don't necessarily care, it's just that your hands are tied. I do wish that there was a little bit more leniency, but with just having that understanding of what is going on, is great. And I want to say thank you. I just want to say thank you guys for caring, and thank you for letting me share.
Thank you. So we will continue with item 4.2, approval of the funding recommendations. At this moment, does anybody on the board have any conflicts with any of the agencies that we need to disclose? Okay. I'll open for a motion for approval.
Go ahead.
I'll set the motion.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Can we have just a little bit of discussion before we vote?
Yes.
Is that okay? I just wanted to make a comment because, we've been doing this for a number of us for a number of years, and we've seen at the presentation for those funding, for the grant funding, a lot of the same organizations. So I would like to personally say that I was really excited to see new organizations come forward this year. And I'm sure it's not easy because they come into a process that's pretty well oiled, and they see organizations that have done it for a while and that know what they're doing, and so they're kind of going into this with a little bit of not with a head start, with the opposite of a head start. Especially this year, the organization that I'm thinking of is an organization that is trying to provide help in helping developing those child care facilities that are the small, mom and pop, usually family owned and family operated child care, agencies, if we can call them that, in our community. And I've actually seen a lot of information lately online and offline about how child care is directly related to workforce, obviously, and how those that still complain that people don't want to work don't realize that those people in question just may not have a person to take care of their kids, may not have a place or a trusted person that they can leave with these kids. And I think it's really important that we remember that there's a direct link, a very, very direct link between childcare and workforce, and that in turn, childcare can help, childcare is needed for people to go back to work. And in turn, when we put those children into childcare facilities, we're creating more jobs. And so that cycle really just helps, help our community develop. So I just wanted to make a comment about that.
I want to just echo what you're saying, and yes, the city staff and the technical review committee work very hard to make sure that all applicants who want to get funding at least can be walked through the process. And in the technical review side, we do raise questions, but we do whatever we can to make sure that they get through. Any other comments, questions before we call for a vote? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now we'll move to the director's report.
So unfortunately, there's just no way for me to bring this up in the time we have today.
Denise, I'm sorry, real quick, we can do it by Bluetooth. I can plug it into your computer and send it to the,
What?
do you want to?
I have no idea what she's referring to, but that's fantastic. Shall I email it to you?
No, we're going to go into your computer. Make sure you take down the
Technology.
That's why we're economic development and housing at the IT. Yes, ma'am.
While you're doing that, ma'am, is that the PowerPoint that you did? That
The
helps
CDBG
explain
app?
the spreadsheet? Yeah. Connected public.
Yes, so I'm sure Nicole will publish that.
Thank you.
No? Do you publish that? Oh, that'll be in the minutes. I don't know.
No.
I'll send it to you.
Okay. Thank you.
While they're pulling housing is a very important part of that because as well, how are you gonna shower, how are you gonna be presentable for work, how is someone that is trying to re-enter the workforce supposed to be able to, be a normal working individual without housing, so that's all I wanted to say, just childcare.
Thank you. What do we do now?
You use your computer.
Ah, you are so smart, Nicole.
You just might want to close out your email or anything else.
So that's where I'm gonna find it.
Oh,
It's the easiest place for me to find it. Good thing I only do work. See, it's super work.
I just took you off all the monitors so you
So you don't see me hunting and pecking through here trying to find what I need? Alright. Sure, content not available.
are you on Wi-Fi?
Daggone it. Pardon me?
Are you on the Wi-Fi?
Mm-hmm. I will find it another way. Bear with me. Patience of Job for you all. I appreciate it. It's doing good things. Yes. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so this is draft. This is a dashboard, and let me see if I can zoom that up a little bit. So as you can see, the tabs here at the top are interactive, broken down by how we track stuff. It's multifamily home new construction and rehab, multifamily rental, multifamily home new construction is home ownership. Single-family home acquisition, single-family home new construction, etc. And then this dashboard will, there's nothing in 2023, so what we, active projects will not be shown for current fiscal year. It will not be shown on, until the year closes out. So our fiscal year closes in October, but by the time we get all the reporting done, it's December. So the dashboard for the previous year will show, when we get to January 2024, you'll see 2023 data. So as you can see here, we can sort by year. It tells us how many units have been produced, how many, both rental, et cetera, how much funding we've allocated toward those projects, and it will map them there. Importantly, the single-family homes are not, you cannot pull by address. We didn't think it was appropriate to disclose everybody's address out there. So, but you can, you can sort, as I said, by type. Let's see, let me get to here. Field here. So purchase assistance, you can see them mapped throughout the city, et cetera. We did 33 homeownership units allocating over $900,000. Because it's purchase assistance, you won't see anything in the rental, right? Makes sense. So that dashboard is, I think it's highly informative. And then we also have, click off of this. So then we also have additional information on a second page here, and breakdown of units by type, and they're color coded to match those boxes at the top. And then, you can see, right, 2019, 2020, so we had some weird times in there. It was multifamily rehab we did. Lexington was a big project we did, I think in 21. But some craziness there, in large part due to COVID. So 19, the numbers are really low. I can't really explain that one. It was pre-pandemic. I'm sure there are reasons for that. I just haven't gotten into the why. But certainly, real estate prices had started to climb pretty good at that point. But also interest rates were pretty low. So I'm not sure why generally those numbers are low. I don't know if you can see that, yeah. We'll dive into that one. You'll be able to tab on any of these and see the data. So it's a really cool tool. We're still figuring out how to use it. I'd like to be able to expand the information a little bit over time, but we thought it was important since the number of units and what we do is, we're always being asked questions like that. Maybe at some point we'll incorporate the facilities and services programs that we do as well. But so this, I hope to have it go live in a couple of weeks. I'm a little short-handed with Chuck being out of the office and assigned elsewhere. So it'll probably be a couple more weeks, honestly, before I can get it up on the website because there's other narrative that I need to kind of put around it to give this context. But so that's the housing dashboard. And Nicole, if you could shut down the screen, that would be great. And I'll move on, if you don't mind, to the director's report. How's that? Unless there's questions about the dashboard.
Thank you for that.
I have a question, and to Brian's point, can we map out like our goals and then with the product, what happened, every year? So, how many multifamily new construction units we have as a goal for the city of Clearwater and how many we were able to achieve and so on. Rentals and new construction, single family, and, is there a way that we can map that out to see exactly our goals and what we were able to achieve?
So, yes, but I don't like it. And what I'd like to change is going to follow the housing study. So right now, our caper that you all see in December tells us how we did against our annual action plan. Tells you how many units we produced, where we spent our money, the goal outcome indicators, persons served, households served, units produced, things like that. And I think that's an awful way to tell you what we did. That's just some way that HUD said you need to report the data. So I hate the way it's currently done. Where I'd like to get to, and one of the reasons certainly we're doing this housing study, is to really understand the universe of what we have and the needs. I mean, we all kind of know them anecdotally. We hear them all the time approaching the podium, right? But then with council, establish those goals based on recommendations, establish those goals so that we can measure against them. That's really one of the primary objectives for me in conducting that housing study. Is we need to have a really good understanding of what we have, come to agreement, hopefully consensus, on where we'd like to be, and then establish those goals and understand the barriers to achieving those, or those opportunities that we have. And that requires as well understanding our funding sources and the limitations placed upon us, so on and so forth. So I would love to get to where I think you would like to go, and certainly we see some of our neighboring municipalities come out with great declarative statements about what their goals are, and we want to be able to do that as well. I'd like it to be data-based for us so that we can really understand what we need to do to move the needle, and that's that requires a good look.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you. Director's report, thank you. So as Kevin mentioned, Pete Scalia is no longer on our board. He has turned out, and I'm sure he's enjoying now fully his retirement. I understand he still goes to the racetrack on Wednesdays. So Kevin, however, also turned out, but he applied and was appointed again to the board. So thank you so much for your continuing commitment to this board. As always, we're very grateful for your service. Council appointed Linda Byers to replace Pete on this board. Linda is, she's a finance and rehab manager with the city of St. Pete, which is, unusual. To my knowledge, we've never had an employee from another municipality in this work, sitting on this board. But I think it'll be really good and interesting to have her perspective as she comes in here. Certainly we'll hear about the programs perhaps that St. Pete is doing, what they might be doing different, better, maybe worse, I don't know. I'm sure it'll be wonderful insight that she's able to provide. So her term technically starts June 1, but because we don't have any action items coming forward in June, this is now technically your summer break that you'll be on. Because in July, I need another quorum for another required public hearing. And as I mentioned, that's the annual action plan. I'm getting reminded reminder about something, sorry. It is, as I mentioned, a required public hearing. Amanda Warner, Wade Trim, you've gotten to know her over the years. She's going to come in and review that very lengthy document, usually about 85 pages. There will be a quiz at the end on a chapter-by-chapter basis. But it is required by HUD, and we have to approve that through both public hearing, public comment period. Council eventually approves that in the mid-July cycle, and it has to be submitted to HUD before August 15th deadline. It represents, or will represent for fiscal year 23-24, the fourth year of our 5-year consolidated plan. So next year, when we're in this cycle, in addition to the annual action plan, we'll be working on the even longer document known as the consolidated plan, which is why we utilize consultants for that kind of big work. So, but this will be year 4, and it will incorporate, as I mentioned, the expected funding sources. You might see some slight modifications, as I mentioned, for carryover and different things. It will also include the description of the projects and the funding allocations for each of them, and then the goals and objectives, those goal outcome indicators that tell you how many units, how many people that we hope to serve, those kinds of things. And it will, in establishing those goals, it'll also identify the geographic areas we intend to serve, the needs addressed, the funding sources, et cetera, et cetera. And because this is a required public hearing, I would like you all to make sure you check your calendar twice to ensure that you're planning to be here on July 11th. That is our next meeting. What I'd like to bring forward in July, with your indulgence, is review of the Live Local Act. This was just passed, and it shows a dramatic increase in state allocated funding. While we receive SHIP funding, most of the funding actually goes to the Florida Housing Finance Corporation and is utilized in different ways. It can be used for apartment loans and on and on and on, a number of different things. And then there's some both good and interesting tax advantages, that one of which is a local option for us, and there's pros and cons to that. One, we certainly, if we provide a tax exemption on affordable housing, that means tax revenues won't be coming in on those developments. But the other sort of weird hiccup with that is it's only good for 4 years. It has to be renewed every 4 years. So that's a little bit daunting, I think, for developers perhaps, because somebody's going to have to pay those property taxes if not renewed. And of course, every 4 years, we have an all-new council potentially, right? So it's a little bit wonky, but we'll talk about that in July. But I haven't really had much time to digest it yet. As with most things that go, that get passed legislatively, it's the rulemaking that gets constructed after. So all I really have to go on right now is the legislation. I don't have a lot of info on how it will be implemented, because as I said, that rulemaking often comes later. So in July, probably have a good discussion on kind of what the state has done and what those opportunities may mean for us. But as per the usual, the devil's in the details when it comes to implementing. All right?
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions, but that concludes my report.
I guess I can ask my question now. I was
Yeah.
going to wait, but in a prior meeting, and I apologize, I don't remember when it was, but we had talked about the discussion, we had started a conversation about potentially changing the time that we're hosting this meeting so that we can have more public participation, and we've had great public participation in the last 2 meetings. But I know that one of the participants that came up to the podium today talked about how they didn't know that they had a voice in something like this, and I think the time that we have these meetings, kind of helps, or, the opposite with that. And so I just wanted to kind of ask for an update on that. I know we had talked, and it was back when Chuck was here, and so I know things have changed, so I just wanted to make sure that we don't forget about that part of the conversation that we started a few months ago.
Well, thank you for the reminder, and it's actually a question I have for Nicole. Do we have the e-comments open yet? So Nicole's going to open e-comments. No?
Why not?
I don't have the access to that.
No, not in this meeting, but I think what we intended to do is make that available so that people could comment.
Correct.
We suggested that as an interim step to see if that helped drive engagement. Yeah, one of the challenges in changing the time is we have the city clerk's office, who's currently down 2 board reporters, trying to manage 17 boards or some crazy number of boards that they have. So changing the time has implications in a lot of other areas. So we certainly recommend that we take the interim step of opening up the e-comments once we post the agenda, and because we post the agenda 2 weeks in advance. And what we can talk to public communications about too is making sure that they're pushing out on their social channels more aggressively that the agenda has been published and that e-comments, the opportunity to provide e-comments is available. And then those comments can be read into the record.
Right. Following up on that, because I was thinking it too, because the last 2 meetings has been so great with having the engagement of the public. I mean, one, having the discussions, the things it helps me think about as well. So that has been very uplifting for the year I've been on the board. Actually have people here and speaking with us and giving feedback and letting us know what they're doing in the community as well and how we can help support that. So any way that we can get more engagement, but I know, I thought in that discussion, we talked about the evening meeting and the overall feedback we were getting is that changing that time might not actually help.
Right, which is what we had talked about, opening
Right.
up the comments first and getting a push from public communication so that we could see if really it was something that, people were saying, yes, please change it, or if we were just saying, we might not need to change it, we might just need to make sure that they are aware that there's other ways than being here in person.
That was what I was gonna get to, is more the announcement of the meetings and how we can get more people engaged that way through social media or things like that, and maybe giving what the topic is ahead of time and having a post, please come share, or she said she didn't know she had a voice, to draw people into not just this, but probably all the different boards, because I'm learning about the different things that they have brought up, and I had no idea that was happening in Clearwater.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Now we'll move on to item 6, board members to be heard. I'll start on my right for any comments.
I do have a comment. I want to thank everybody that was here today, voicing your opinions. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ditto.
Yeah, same thing.
Thank you so much for your participation.
I think I just said it, but I should have asked, somebody had mentioned staffing openings. Is there openings right now in housing? Is there staffing besides, I know Chuck is not, but are there, right now, are we having issues or do we have openings?
No, I am one of those few and very blessed departments that has no vacancies.
And you don't need any more help, right?
She didn't say that.
That's why we're getting 2 months off.
It is my turn. I want to raise a question to the rest of the board. The last 2 meetings, we've had conversations from the public in regards to the affordable housing. And we all know we're getting ready to move into the fall season when we convert to an AHAC with bringing additional members on board. My questions to the rest of the board is, what do you see we should do as a board prior to that bringing on the new members for the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee? Do you see anything else we should be doing to prepare for that?
I think it's always hard to prepare for that when we are in the season of, each of our goals and things that we have to accomplish, our objectives. So I think it's a great question to pose and probably something we need to think about and have a discussion about?
We can talk about this at the next meeting too, but the one question I would have would be, and I know Pete Scalia mentioned it many, many times, whether we wanted to do a roundtable or a discussion to get public comments on it. We appreciate the comments that's coming to us, but is there a way that we can, as a board, encourage gathering of public? We've got some folks who are interested now that maybe they could get others to involve. That might be something we would want to move into in the early fall and do that. So I'm just bringing that up for think about, and as to whether, and I don't even know if that's possible to be done with the city.
We've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
When when do we begin moving into the AHAC portion? What month is that?
So we'll take to council in early August a resolution to establish the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and those meetings start in early September.
So it would probably be, we would want to do this before.
I would, if we were going to move forward with something, I would say in August.
Are we allowed, what are the rules with that? Are we allowed to have a round table or like a workshop meeting?
So it would be publicly noticed. The public noticing requirement, I'm not sure what that is, we'd have to look. And then, depending on kind of what your vision is, I don't see why we couldn't put it together. But, getting to an agenda, trying to figure, and the resources that you would want available to you, that might be a little more challenging to figure out. Let me put some thought on it. Is everybody open to a June meeting if I think that we need to get together in June to talk about it? Okay.
Yes.
I'll need to check, because I'll need to check bylaws and rules too, to understand what our limitations might be. And because this is a required public hearing, we then have a city clerk staffing requirement. And we typically videotape these things as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in these chambers, but, you took a bus tour as an example, and that wasn't videotaped. But, so we may be able to do that. So let me think about that and look at a couple things, and you may get an email from me in the next week or so saying, I think we need to have a June meeting. Is that comfortable?
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments from the board? And unless we hear from Ms. Sanderson in the next couple weeks about a June meeting, our next meeting will probably be July 11th. So with that, meeting is adjourned.